Natasha has been a fellow of the CCD for a long time. And what the aim of these talks is, the CCD works, is to showcase the work of fellows who have been part of the organization for some time and whose current professional work was in some way initiated, sparked, incubated during their collaborations with the CCD, because we believe that it's through this creation of networks and mutual collaboration that we can really create more work for all of us, architects and other professions who want to improve the built environment. So Natasha is here with us. The few words I want to say about her, and she'll tell us a bit more about her journey now, is that she's an extraordinary person, architect, artist, come on. She's capable of creating her own models of well-being and social sustainability for architecture and for urban development. I know she's been really involved with London through the creation of the guidelines that today she'll be talking about, but also through contests, through work. I feel very proud to be able to introduce Natasha today, and really happy she's joined us. I think she's an example of one of these bright, gifted designers who see a way to create better spaces for people and are leading this path in the world. So that said, welcome, Natasha, and you can share the screen now.
Well, thanks, Marta. What an introduction. That's such kind words, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you in Italy tonight. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. It's really great to be involved in this CCD work series. As Marta said, I've been a fellow for a little while now, and it's been a really important part of my journey in developing this different form of design practice focused on shaping places for health, well-being, and social sustainability. So I reached quite a major milestone last year with this work, having developed a design framework around the human experience of places, and had that adopted here in London in one of the boroughs, so as part of local government. So I'll be sharing the sort of journey to getting there, and I'm now looking at how to best grow this approach, mainstream the work that many of us are doing in this area, and looking to collaborate to create more change. So I will share my screen. Hopefully that will work. Great. And I can't see anyone, but if there's any problems with it, give me a shout. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an overview about what I do. I'm founder of Matter Space Soul, which is a specialist design lab reimagining our cities and spaces to enrich life. And for me, this means going beyond the visible physical aspects of places to focus instead on human nature, needs, and human experience. And really, the big aim is to help accelerate a paradigm shift towards urban health and happiness through the power of design to make meaningful change. So my area of focus is around the intersection of design with the human sciences and the arts, which is why I got involved with the Centre for Conscious Design. And through the work as a fellow, I've been doing all sorts of different bits of research, but also meeting people in the network, being involved in conferences. So I'll share a little bit about that, but it's been really core to how my work's been developing. So to give you a bit of the flavour of where my journey's been so far in terms of design and different types of ways of bringing forward more humane approaches, and doing all sorts of different types of projects, whether that's live built project or speculative research projects about how to shape places for quality of life. And these have almost been sort of pilot projects to test new approaches, and that's been developing over the last 10 years or so. And alongside that, do a lot of advocacy work speaking about why we need change, how we might be able to get there. And since the pandemic, there's been a lot more interest and support in this, which has been really good to see. So it's quite exciting to see the rest of the industry starting to want these things and understand why it's important. So as some background, I'm an architect by training, and that's what I practiced in. But about 10 years ago, I moved away from more traditional practice. And even though I was working somewhere really fantastic, really award-winning, I felt that just in the industry more widely, the commercial forces that were shaping architecture made it quite difficult to really follow my interest in the human aspects of places. And so that's when I started to do research projects, more arts-based projects where I could explore those sorts of ideas. And this quote really sits at the heart of what I've been looking at. Says, the art of architecture studies not structure in itself, but the effects of structure on the human spirit. And that's from the Architecture of Humanism, written in 1914. So these are not new concerns or aspirations. And there's been a long line of different architects or theorists who've looked at more human aspects of places and doing things differently. But I think my issue is that that's not the mainstream way of how places are shaped at the moment. And it's always the exception rather than the norm or the everyday. So what I've been doing is looking to find ways to move towards alternative forms of spatial design. And when I say spatial design, I'm covering sort of architecture, urban design, interiors as well, as a catch-all term. And the work I've been doing when I started in 2013 was considered quite fringe and at the edges of the architectural profession, looking at human experience or emotion, empathy, ideas around equity. And then as I started to get to know the conscious cities movement and the work of the Centre for Conscious Design, started to bring in more evidence-based approaches. That developed through a lot of experimentation and exploration until 2023, 10 years later. These ideas started to become more mainstream, and I was able to bring the work that I'd done around a new form of design into pragmatic application in local government in London within new design policy and requirements. So today I'm going to share firstly a bit of a polemic or narrative about why we need these new approaches to set the scene. I'll talk about how this type of design, how I've been applying it in projects and bringing together different sort of drawing from different disciplines, sometimes working in collaboration with other professionals. And then I'll come to how this got applied into policy and looking at the wider ideas of systems change and how to make this happen more widely and not just, individuals going and doing projects one by one, and how that's all been intertwined with my work as a Centre for Conscious Design fellow. So I got to know about the Conscious Cities movement back in 2016, and I discovered this through a conference that was bringing together neuroscientists with architecture. And I met Itai there and talked about the Conscious Cities movement. And I found, sort of after feeling quite different from a lot of people in my profession, I found this community of like-minded people who are also interested in this human aspect of places. And for me, that's been really important when you're trying to do something that's a bit different, to feel that you've got that support and community of practice around you. And this led to doing things as a fellow, but one of those was co-chairing and co-curating the Conscious London Festival in 2020 with two other fellows, with Jenny Jones and Mark Pasudo. And we put together 3 days worth of events bringing together lots and lots of different experts and disciplines to talk about how can cities better contribute to flourishing. And we brought people that are working within the sciences, whether that's neuroscience or psychology, behavioral sciences, people that are focused on connectedness for one day, so that was around social impact, or connectedness in terms of sociability between people, and then also a session on ecosystems about the ecological aspect of this work. And one of the key pieces of work I did was put together an article and a paper about an idea for compassionate spaces, and this was as part of the Conscious Cities anthology in 2019. And this asks the question, what would our built environment look like if we took our emotional, psychological, and social needs today as the starting point for creating our surroundings? And this set out the first ideas around a human experience design framework, which I've been testing out and developing through projects, through live ones, but also these speculative research ones. And then fast forward, we have the pandemic, everything changes. People now understand, or more aware of the impact of the built environment on people's health, on quality of life, on well-being, how we interact with one another. And I had the opportunity to work within Brent Council. This is one of the London boroughs. It's got a population of around 340,000. So it's the 5th largest London borough. And like many places in this city and in many cities around the world, it's experiencing high growth. There's a need for high density to deliver on housing. And this brings lots of challenges in terms of quality of life, but also lots of opportunities to do things differently. And they were looking for new design policy, particularly around residential development, because that's what most of the development happening is. And what I was able to develop and implement was a version of the human experience framework that I'd done as part of my practice method, but a version that was applied to the public sector in a way that people could understand sometimes quite complex ideas, and breaking that down into something that could be applied by lots of different types of people. So this was called the Place Quality Framework, and it's a method for design that takes people through step by step a range of different dimensions across health and well-being, community and belonging, and creating vibrant and inclusive places. And then that breaks down into a range of different criteria. And I'll show you a little bit more on this later in the presentation. But essentially what it does is changing the definition of design quality for what the requirements are for planning permission. So now developments within the whole borough of Brent will need to address a whole series of design considerations around quality of life based on this. So that was implemented last summer, and we'll start to see how that's affecting projects going through the planning system this year. So that's really exciting. So why do we need this urgent change? I'm just going to set the scene, the bigger picture. Although we're probably preaching to the converted here, but it's always nice to sort of step back sometimes. And for me, it's been really nice to reflect on this as part of preparing for this talk. So we're living at a time of intersectional and complex challenges, and there are multiple crises going on, as we know, not just ecological, but mental health, so increasing loneliness, social fragmentation, loss of sense of belonging. These are all things that the built environment can and really should be addressing. But there's recognition that the thinking that's gone before cannot solve the challenges of today. So there's an urgent need to refocus our efforts, values, and priorities. And if cities are to improve the human condition, there can't be progress without a reorientation to the human experience of places, to address what really matters to people and communities and their direct and indirect needs. There's more awareness and evidence now of how our surroundings affect how we feel, how we interact and behave, as well as our sense of community, identity, and belonging. And these are things that all deeply impact people's quality of life. And there exists much research within many of the human sciences around these topics for a long time, but is not being translated or applied into the everyday practice of designing or shaping places fast enough. Although many of us are trying to do that, but in terms of the mainstream, it's not happening quickly enough to make the change that we need. And generally, the growing consensus is that current practices of urban design and planning are insufficient to protect and improve health, and that there's an understanding that there are many people whose needs are not being met by current design and planning. So at the moment, we have built environments that overlook and perhaps even neglect health, connectedness, inclusivity, empathy, and emotion, rather than human environments, which are shaped by how they affect people. And without having a deep understanding of how people experience the places we create and acknowledging the complexity of this, how can we really shape built environments that enable human and social well-being? So for me, I believe that design has the power to create transformational change because designers directly shape the environment in which society lives in a way that others often can't. So there's a lot that can be done through design, and that's where the change can be made. And if we can better understand the dynamics of human environment interactions and the real intricacies of how people are affected by places, then we can start to create places that bring more joy, sociability, meaning, opportunity, empowerment, belonging, vitality, all of these very human things that don't often get talked about within sort of typical industry conversations. But to do this, for me, we need to bring that missing layer of human experience in all its facets and complexity into the way that places are shaped. And this is because people are inherently complex. So we need design that recognizes and prioritizes a deeper sensitivity to our human nature, our feelings, and how we relate to the world and people around us. And these are all invisible qualities of places which are often quite hard to measure, but we do need to change what's valued to be able to rethink how our surroundings can be shaped accordingly. So the work that I'm been doing, and I'll show some examples, is about expanding the boundaries of design to maximize the human potential of places. So going beyond spatial design, and actually the human experience should be first. It should be the thing that you begin with, rather than it being an add-on or a nice to have, as it sometimes is considered in terms of well-being or quality of life. And to be able to make the shift towards more deeply humane, compassionate, or conscious places, I think we need to be going beyond people focused. So that's sort of industry standard speak at the moment, to actually actively integrating considerations about physical, mental, emotional, and social health, working with disciplines that have a lot of knowledge around those areas, and moving beyond that even towards how can we support flourishing and growth for people and communities, and create places that are attuned to human sensibilities, so that psychological, emotional, and social well-being is considered as standard. So that's the the goal in a way. So now I'll show some projects. We've got a couple of case studies, and then I'll show you how that's all sort of added up to inform this new design framework, the place quality framework, and share a little bit more about that. And this is an image from my very first project, where I was commissioned as a socially engaged artist, because that was seen to be the only format where I could explore issues to do with people and place at the time. So what I've been looking at is across a really wide range of scales, starting with the individual, always starting with that sort of micro scale, about how people perceive place, their feelings, their senses, emotions and behaviors. And this expands into lots of other realms like cognitive ability, and that's more of the realms of neuroscience. Next level is around community scale, so whether that's about connectedness or sense of place, or cultural vitality. And then the larger scale is around the more macro issues of the city, things like the wider determinants of health, so things that relate to, say, deprivation, wider culture or social inequalities, and how all these things interlink, because people's well-being and health sort of cut across all of these different areas, and you can't really deal with it just by looking at one scale. So I'm going to start from the very smallest scale, a project example, which is from a while back, when I first started working independently, and this was commissioned for the City of London to reimagine part of the Thames Riverside Walk. So this is Blackfriars Bridge railway station, quite near to St Paul's, and the north side of the river at the time was not so well used as the South Bank, where there's lots of cultural institutions. And this particular bit of the Riverside Walk was, at night time, it could feel quite dangerous or secluded. And over the last 10 years or so, the city's done a lot of work to reconnect the city to the river. But at the time, lots of work needed here. So I was looking at how to connect people to a sense of safety and place, but can we introduce a sense of delight and even wonder? So this is a very small scale intervention, but it has kind of city scale strategic aspects to it in terms of bringing to life this important part of the Riverside Walk. And the concept was it was called the River of Wells, and that's because one of the hidden rivers, the River Fleet, joins the Thames here, and that was known as the River of Wells. It had healing wells, apparently, a long time ago. And this installation / public space intervention was inspired by this, in terms of very much being what we'd call now biophilic design, but taking a natural analogue, creating structures of sort of well-like shapes, and being inspired by the idea of reflecting water. So all these little well shapes had a pattern of water that was taken from the Thames, and colours taken from Monet's paintings of the Thames, where the atmosphere would change over days and seasons. And this intervention was quite small, but it gave the chance to explore lots of concepts around biophilia, connection to nature, even though it's not nature itself, but the forms that you find in nature, how to sort of elicit interaction and joy, and have a strong sense of identity that's rooted to the sense of place. And the idea of these well-like structures would reflect light from new light poles down to the structures, then onto the underside of the bridge, and that would change with the movement of the tide. So worked with lighting designers on that, and unfortunately, this wasn't ever completed because just along the river, there's a giant super sewer structure that was built and took over the site. But I'm showing this as one of the first kind of projects looking at that human experience in more detail. And there's some images from prototyping this, these structures and testing how can you reflect light like water but using metal. So it's really kind of intimate scale of the details and how we can replicate that through design. And this started a way of trying to understand how we can see design through different factors about the human experience. So started to be able to break this into different categories about how it affects you physically, mentally or emotionally, how spaces that create wonder and awe can also promote social connectedness and create a sense of identity. So this was a tiny project, but important in many ways. And I attended a talk just this afternoon about the impact of details in design. So I thought I'd put in something from that. There's a talk by Anne Sussman and Justin Hollander that showed some images of a building with or without a sort of mosaic type artwork, and the way that people responded to that differently with eye tracking. And you can see that people's gaze sort of really radically change, even with this kind of relatively small detail added to a building. And they measured smiles of people increased when they did this. So I thought that was quite interesting as a sort of example of the, you can start with small things that have big impact. Then some of the other types of projects go from sort of interior scale up to a more urban scale. So this is a hotel that I did in Berlin. And this was very much about creating an intimate home from home. A lot of people traveling here were business travelers, so they were mostly on their own. So trying to find ways to make people feel really welcome, that they're comfortable enough to be able to connect potentially with other people. And so all the details in this was part of the design. So from the furniture to the colours of the stripes on the lampshades and the picking of the art. So this was sort of full design. And the process for this was about designing through the experience that you'd have and through the journey, and literally sketching out how you'd experience each sequence of spaces, how people would feel in each of those spaces, what they can see. And so there's a very strong sense of sort of comfort and homeliness and welcome here. But also one of the factors was about creating safety, which you wouldn't normally associate with a hotel, but they'd had some quite difficult situations with people coming in to hold up the receptionists in the past. So it was created with the sense of being able to see who's coming in and all these things to make the hotel staff feel good themselves, not just the guests. So it's considering everyone's wellness as one, and some of the details around how to sort of make lone travellers feel more comfortable was taking some aspects from something called the prospect refuge theory, which I'm sure lots of people here already know what that is. But the idea that you can sit somewhere and feel protected behind you, but you have a view around from evolutionary theory that was good for survival. And I think just intuitively, you know that you tend to go and sit on benches where you're not exposed on all sides, whether that's in an interior space or a public square. And here again, there's lots of aspects that relate to biophilic design and natural materials, and using lots of tactile and textured surfaces. But a big feature was the use of colour and the emotional response that you get, so creating uplifting, inviting and tactile spaces. And then similarly, we have, this is an office space, and this is more about how do you materialize a new culture and identity for a group of people. And this was for a new type of law firm, their first space. And in terms of sort of well-being and wellness, the focus here was more about having a sense of identity, of pride, and of a connection. For people, it was just before the pandemic, but people wanted to work remotely. It was a women-led law firm, so a lot of the aspects were about how to enable more flexible working for family life, and to create a space that was different to the very traditional kind of prestigious law firm offices that you normally find in the city. And so with this, I had some advice and informal work with the environmental psychologists to start to pick out some of the aspects that would be good to focus on for workspace, particularly. The client wanted for herself and for her team a place where you feel like you can take your shoes off, which is probably not what you associate with a law firm, but it was about that feeling character of homeliness, of comfort, but also of pride in what they're doing as a new team. So the way the spaces were arranged and set out were about how you feel in those different spaces, and what you can see. And a lot of the aspects are about how do you enable privacy, but also collaboration. And this is quite a small space, and doing that in a compact way. And also thinking through how you really inhabit the spaces at that really intimate scale, again, of the person interacting with their desk. So we had desks that you can adjust to sort of sit-stand desks, but thinking about how the spaces were arranged to enhance focus, to not overload your mind with sort of visual clutter, so there's cognitive load. So it went from sort of quite busy, not busy, but elaborate designs to something quite simple in the end, to reduce some of that around the desk space. And as part of some of the research, we found that one of the most important psychological factors relating to productivity was ability to alter the work environment. There's lots of parts of this that's about people customizing the space, being able to rearrange things as they wanted, and also having personal space whilst being able to still connect with colleagues or see people. So a lot of divisions of glass, but also material to allow you to screen to different degrees if you want more privacy. I'm going to speed up a bit because just noticing time. But the idea with this was to create that sense of home and a very different type of work culture. And all of those things are a part of feeling a sense of well-being and supporting people, whether that's reducing stress, so that's more directly about health, or having that sense of purpose, and a different type of well-being aspects. So larger scale, this was a more speculative urban proposal about how we can use design to connect us. So in terms of housing and larger developments, and this was, I was involved with the Loneliness Lab, which was a sort of collective and initiative around the topic to develop more guidelines around this. So the concept design over here on the right was featured as one of the exemplar projects about how to catalyse connectedness and sociability. And having lots of different ways of doing that, but I drew a lot from anthropology, and the way that we form groups and gather, and there's certain numbers of people that you get to know. I think it's about 150 people where you reach your limit of who you can still recognise. So creating smaller clusters of communities, bringing together different types of people, and using things like how you move through the building to encourage people to interact, to bump into one another, to encounter your neighbours, as well as having more formal gathering spaces. So all these things started to inform a set of principles that could be applied to master planning. So from the very first principles, how you embed different aspects from health and wellbeing and quality of life, and designing from the human experience to that bigger scale. So still thinking about the small scale details, different concepts, whether that's about legibility of space or harmony, or the ways that views can draw people through. Lots of different things here, but just to give you a sense of how that plays out in terms of designing from a different perspective. And this gave a series of outcomes that are based on human experience, from physiological, psychological, emotional, social, cultural, and civic. And so this formed the basis for applying this into policy. So I've got a couple more slides just on how that's been taken forward within the Borough of Brent as this framework. This is an image of doing some training with the officers and the teams who are now applying this, to be able to firstly make them aware and understand the impacts that the built environment has and the complexity of that. And we did a series of different workshops and trainings to really give them the knowledge and the tools to be able to do that themselves, and be confident in doing that. So I'm going to show what it is without going into too much detail. And if you're interested, there's sort of full CPD talks on my website. But this is a new approach, method and system. So it's about embedding health, wellbeing, inclusivity into places, based on lots of the different things I've been talking about, and tested through design projects. But essentially it's reframing how developments are expected to be designed and now assessed for planning permission, to put how places impact people front and centre of that process. So that's been really, it's had a lot of interest. So last year I was doing a lot of talks. It's featured as a case study for Homes England for health and design. And it's about that, how do we create that systemic change? So for me, this was about doing it upstream in the development process, and making that shift from considering design to be good based on the physical or quantitative aspects, so numbers, visual appearance, form, going beyond those things to the qualitative aspects of human experience and outcomes. And so now this has set this new benchmark within Brent Council to shape growth into the future. And this covers a lot of the things I've already touched on, but all the way from physical and mental well-being to inclusivity, sense of place, belonging and ownership, and starting to think about how can we empower people through place. In this area of London, there's a lot of cultural diversity, issues with social cohesion, a lot of young people in this area particularly. So what I'd prepared as the human experience framework then got shaped as well to some of the priorities of this area. And experiencing, there's a lot of health inequalities and deprivation as well. And it covers the scale of a master plan all the way through to the details of, say, corridors. So it's both internal and external spaces. And it's very much about the spatial qualities rather than the level of the finish. Simple things like how people move through the space, how they connect with one another, is that through what they can see. Sometimes it's just starting with some of the sort of fundamentals, because a lot of the developments that didn't have any of these things that were coming through. So it's really multifaceted, holistic design methods to cover many needs. So as well as tackling lots of issues around, say, loneliness or mental health, there's a whole section that's about specific user needs. So whether that's designing for women, for older people, younger people, or neurodiverse. So bringing together lots of things where people have done work around, but there's not many opportunities to see that when it's all brought together. So hopefully this starts to do that. And the way that it works, it's a series of design consideration and steps. So these different criteria that you see here break down into a whole range of questions about that experience of place and the benefits for people. So it could be about how, as basic as how you're making this place comfortable. And that starts with sort of baseline level of practice. And then there's more leading expectations about making empowering places. So does it involve co-design? Is it a place that builds community more meaningfully? And how does it go beyond designing for everyone to address different user needs in real specific detail? So there's a whole range of different criteria in there, which I'm not showing at the moment, but you can have a look at the SPD if you would like. And one of the things that was quite important was being able to shape how the assessment process worked as part of this system. So depending on how big the scheme is, the expectation to deliver on quality of life will be higher when it's a larger scheme, because there's more impact, not just for the residents involved, but the wider communities around as well. So whether that's 10 homes or 2,000 homes, there'll be a different level of what's needed to be achieved in terms of quality of life. And the other part of that is how this can address inequalities. So the assessment is built in a requirement for the context to be assessed. So say on the left, you've got a map of open space sufficiency. So in areas where you have less open space, there'll be higher expectations to deliver on quality of life and well-being and health, because there's already a disadvantage in that area. And then similarly on the right, you've got a map of deprivation. So the higher the level of deprivation in the area, the better that development's going to have to be to get planning permission. So it starts to address equity, but that's a huge topic as well in itself. So just finishing up now, that's been adopted and it's starting to be used on developments. And I was successful in getting an academic evaluation granted for this, that will study the impacts on developments going through the planning process and the improvements in terms of health over the next 12 to 18 months. And that will be the improvement to the design of those developments, but also improvements to the officers' knowledge and understanding of healthy places. So there's two aspects to this, and basically can't wait for this to be done and actually see how it's working and how it can be improved as well. So I'm sure there's lots of areas where there could be a next iteration for the future. So what I'm working on now is how this, as a prototype or pilot intervention, can help seed wider change or more collective action, and acting as a way to channel lots of different knowledge and work that people are doing into a more structured approach for embedding quality of life, building hopefully on the academic assessment evaluation of this. And to end, I'm looking now at the moment at a 2024 version of the Compassionate Spaces piece that I wrote for the Conscious Cities anthology, and coming back to the idea of shifting from creating built environments to creating human environments that have multiple positive effects and that maximize the human potential of places, and to move to shaping experiences that enhance our physical, emotional, and social well-being. And finally, to make change that matters to people because it intentionally and explicitly enriches their lives. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing any questions or thoughts or ideas. And yes, I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.